Father Arni, Svanur, Danielsson, thank you for the honor of joining us at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy here in Berlin and for your lecture and discussion with us today. In this increasingly globalized, interdependent world in which the proliferation of mass communication technology ensure we all have greater access to each other much more than before, cultural diplomacy is critical to fostering peace and stability throughout the world. Religion is a very important part of culture all over the world, and it is developing in different ways in different countries and nations. You are working in a very interesting art area, connecting church life and social media. Now my question is, how is cultural diplomacy helping you in your work with the intersection of church and social media?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things that social media does, generally speaking, is that it breaks down these, walls. Could be a metaphor, because we're here in Berlin talking about the wall. Because in a sense, everyone is equal. Everyone is on the same level. And what social media does is it enables conversation. It enables communication. And it enables us to be in communication with people all over the world. It enables us to spread ideas all over the world and to receive them. And if we manage to encourage and nurture an open conversation between the cultures, I think social media can be of benefit. It can contribute to mutual understanding and to a wider view of the world, I suppose.
Right. Well, in your opinion, what is the greatest wall that the church has to break in order to get in better contact with social media?
Well, I think there is church and church, and I think different churches are doing different things in this field. I mean, if I think about my own context, on the one hand, it's very important to understand the kind of communication that takes place in social media, because we are moving away from the old style of communication where the message was shouted in a sense. And we're moving away from the style of communication where, the pastor takes the sermon up to the pulpit and talks, sort of delivers the message. Not in the sense, of course, the pastors continue to do that, but then after each service, for example, the sermon takes on a life of its own. It's open for discussion, really, and we've tried to do this in Iceland because we established, we get many of the pastors to publish their sermons on a website, and then people can discuss them. So you may have a service in the church building where 50, 100, 150 people attend. But then 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people can experience the sermon and participate in a discussion about it. Now, when it comes to getting people to, the wall we have to break down in order to get the pastors to participate in this is, we have to break down the wall of shyness, and we have to break down the wall of sort of being willing to discuss what you've laid out. And I think it's, there are many factors that enter into it.
I assume this helps very much also the Icelandic diaspora who lives around the world, and it helps it get in contact with the narrative of the theology in Iceland, isn't it?
It does, and also on more levels than this. I mean, they are able. You know, we've had a lot of Icelanders, for example, emigrate to Norway in recent years after the economic collapse in Iceland in 2008, and they are able to keep in contact. And I mean, that's not just a matter for the church. It's also a matter of, you know, I remember when I was a young student of theology, and I went to live in Sweden for a year. And, you know, there was a payphone that you could use. But now you're in constant communication, sending text pictures.
Right. Well, in this context, what is your opinion on how important is cultural diplomacy for strengthening the role of the church?
I think it can be quite important. There is an interchange that takes place, and we want to foster a communication, a dialogue, and I think cultural diplomacy can be one of the tools for that purpose.
I see. Well, how do you see in this more and more secularized world the relationship between youth and religion evolving in the future?
Between youth and religion?
Yeah.
Well, I think if we look at again, speaking from the Icelandic context, we have a very high rate of baptism in Iceland. So I think about 9 out of 10 children are baptized into the church. We have a number of them who then participate in the youth work of the church. Most of them are confirmed in the church, but then the rate drops a lot. And I think that's one of the challenges the church is facing actually at the moment, because we need to empower the young people. We need to help them see the relevance of religion, and to help them to see the church as a platform for a discussion about society, about what constitutes a good society, and how we can collaborate to further that.
Right. But Father Danielsson, you are coming from a theological background of Church of Iceland, which is very progressive. Do you believe detraditionalization and mediatization are bringing religion closer to people, and particularly young people?
I think the answer to that is it has to be a bit of a yes and a no. You know, I mean, in some sense, I think the church is going through a lot of change, in much the same way as society is going through change, and we are to some extent re-evaluating the traditions, and maybe we're at the same time we are, you know, we're not re-evaluating the content of the traditions, but more the form of them. At the very least, I think it's a very interesting time to be working in the church.
Well, this question is very relevant in the context that you have chosen to talk about in your presentation about the theology of the cross, which in the Lutheran theology hasn't always been the main perspective. Do you see this as part of a trend that you've been previously mentioning on turning back to traditions? And
maybe I think it's very important when we are as a theologian. I think it's we reach back into the past. You know, we make use of the elements from the history of theology. We make use of texts or interpret texts from the Bible. But we don't do it to dwell there. You know, we don't venture into the past to stop there, but we go into the past to be inspired and to seek material that we can use today. And we're always trying to be relatable, understandable in the modern context. And what I wanted to do in my talk here was to connect these two symbols, the symbol of the cross, which has been given different interpretations throughout history. And the symbol, or the wall, the Berlin Wall as a symbol, and I could see similarities.
Right. Well, the second question has very much to do with this question-related aspect. And in your study, you discussed the many different representations of clergy in Nordic films. What kind of perspective on the role of religion do the films offer?
Well, I think they offer various kinds of perspectives. I mean, I've looked at Nordic films from, I think the oldest one is from 1918, and the most recent is just from our time, you know, from 2012, 2013. And I think they both give us insight into the position and the status of the clergy throughout the decades. But they also offer indications, probably more of the image of the clergy than the identity of them. For example, if you compare these films, many of them, you know, they show young pastors who are inexperienced and very energetic. They want to change the world. And then they show the old pastors who are quite burnt out, really. So a pastor over 50 is generally speaking burnt out in many of these films. They show sometimes stereotypical male pastors, because we have so many films with male pastors in them that the stereotype has sort of formed. The individual who is struggling on the inside but doesn't let it out. And then we get the female pastors, and we don't have that many films actually with female pastors, and they are more open, sort of more emotionally approachable. Right. So I think a lot of things emerge.
Yeah. Well, when you're mentioning this, my first thought goes to a Danish film called Adam's Apple, Adam's Apples. Yes. What do you think that is the wall that the priest has to go through in that movie?
That's a good question. Well, maybe the priest is a wall in that movie, in the sense that Adam, you know, the convict, who comes to stay with him, and is filled with prejudice, and is filled, in a sense, both with, you know, self-loathing and loathing of the world. He, through the film, sort of accepts the weird worldview of the pastor, who kind of lives within his own world, I think, just accepting yeah, he just sails through life, I suppose we could say, and I think it's exemplified in that particular film, in the first and last scenes of the film, where Adam is driving with the pastor, and he plays a song. I can't recall what song it is, but he really dislikes it at the beginning of the film, and he's sort of moving along at the end.
Well, I think I understand very much what you're saying, and it didn't cross my mind that the priest himself could be in the world. Very interesting perspective. Well, Father Danielsson, thank you so much for this interview and for taking time for being here with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.